Chapter 26 Reconstructing the Crime. Monday, September 17, noon. When Vance finished speaking, there was several minutes' silence. Markham sat deep in his chair glaring into space. Heath, however, was watching Vance with a kind of grudging admiration. The cornerstone in the foundation of his case against Jessup had been knocked out, and the structure he had built was tottering precariously. Markham realized this, and the fact played havoc with his hopes. "I wish your inspirations were more helpful," he grumbled, turning his gaze upon Vance. "This latest revelation of yours puts us back almost to where we started from." "Oh, don't be pessimistic. Let us face the future with a bright eye. Want to hear my theory? It's fairly bulging with possibilities." He arranged himself comfortably in his chair. Skeel needed money. No doubt his silk shirts were running low, and after his unsuccessful attempt to extort it from the lady a week before his demise, he came here last Monday night. He had learned she would be out, and he intended to wait for her, for she had probably refused to receive him in the customary social way. He knew the side door was bolted at night, and, as he didn't want to be seen entering the apartment, he devised the little scheme of unbolting the door for himself under cover of a futile call at 9:30. The unbolting accomplished, he returned via the alleyway, and let himself into the apartment at some time before 11. When the lady returned with an escort, he quickly hid in the clothes closet, and remained there until the escort had departed. Then he came forth, and the lady, startled by his sudden appearance, screamed. But, on recognizing him, she told Spotswood, who was now hammering at the door, that it was all a mistake. So Spotswood ran along and played poker. A financial discussion between Skeel and the lady, probably a highly acrimonious tiff, ensued. In the midst of it the telephone rang, and Skeel snatched off the receiver and said the Canary was out. The tiff was resumed, but presently another suitor appeared on the scene. Whether he rang the bell or let himself in with a key I can't say, probably the latter, for the phone operator was unaware of his visit. Skeel hid himself a second time in the closet, and luckily took the precaution of locking himself in. Also, he quite naturally put his eye to the keyhole to see who the second intruder was. Vance pointed to the closet door. The keyhole, you will observe, is on a line with the davenport, and as Skeel peered out into the room he saw a sight that froze his blood. The new arrival, in the midst, perhaps, of some endearing sentence, seized the lady by the throat and proceeded to throttle her. Imagine Skeel's emotions, my dear Markham. There he was, crouching in the dark closet, and a few feet from him stood a murderer in the act of strangling a lady. Pauvre Antoine! I don't wonder he was petrified and speechless. He saw what he imagined to be maniacal fury in the strangler's eyes, and the strangler must have been a fairly powerful creature, whereas Skeel was slender and almost undersized. No, merci. Skeel wasn't having any. He lay dogo. And I can't say that I blame the beggar, what? He made a gesture of interrogation. What did the strangler do next? Well, we'll never know, now that Skeel, the horrified witness, has gone to his maker. But I rather imagine he got out that black document box, opened it with a key he had taken from the lady's handbag, and extracted a goodly number of incriminating documents. Then, I fancy, the fireworks began. The gentleman proceeded to wreck the apartment in order to give the effect of a professional burglary. He tore the lace on the lady's gown and severed the shoulder strap, snatched her orchid corsage and threw it in her lap, stripped off her rings and bracelets, and tore the pendant from its chain. After that he upset the lamp, rifled the escritoire, ransacked the boule cabinet, broke the mirror, overturned the chairs, tore the draperies, and all the time Skeel kept his eye glued to the keyhole with fascinated horror, afraid to move, terrified lest he be discovered and sent to join his erstwhile inamorata, for by now he was no doubt thoroughly convinced that the man outside was a raving lunatic. I can't say that I envy Skeel his predicament. It was ticklish, you know. Rather. And the devastation went on. He could hear it even when the operation had passed from out his radius of vision. and he himself was caught like a rat in a trap, with no means of escape. A harrowing situation, my word. Vance smoked a moment, and then shifted his position slightly. You know, Markham, I imagine that the worst moment in the whole of Skeel's checkered career came when that mysterious wrecker tried to open the closet door behind which he was crouching. Fancy, there he was cornered, and not 2 inches from him stood, apparently, a homicidal maniac trying to get to him, rattling that thin barricade of white pine. Can you picture the blighter's relief when the murderer finally released the knob and turned away? It's a wonder he didn't collapse from that reaction. But he didn't. He listened and watched in a sort of hypnotic panic until he heard the invader leave the apartment. Then, weak-kneed and in a cold sweat, he came forth and surveyed the battlefield. Vance glanced about him. Not a pretty sight, eh, what? And there on the davenport reclined the lady's strangled body. The corpse was Skeel's dominant horror. He staggered to the table to look at it, and steadied himself with his right hand. That's how you got your fingerprints, Sergeant. Then the realization of his own position suddenly smote him. Here he was alone with a murdered person. He was known to have been intimate with the lady, and he was a burglar with a record. Who would believe that he was innocent? And though he had probably recognized the man who had negotiated the business, he was in no position to tell his story. Everything was against him. His sneaking in, his presence in the house at 9:30, his relations with the girl, his profession, his reputation. He hadn't a chance in this world. I say, Markham, would you have credited his tale? Never mind that, retorted Markham. Go on with your theory. He and Heath had been listening with rapt interest. My theory from this point on, resumed Vance, is what you might term self-developing. It proceeds on its own inertia, so to speak. Skeel was confronted by the urgent problem of getting away and covering up his tracks. His mind in this emergency became keen and highly active. His life was forfeit if he didn't succeed. He began to think furiously. He could have left by the side door at once without being seen, but then the door would have been found unbolted, and this fact, taken in connection with his earlier visit that night, would have suggested his manner of unbolting the door. No, that method of escape wouldn't do. Decidedly it wouldn't do. He knew he was likely, in any event, to be suspected of the murder, in view of his shady association with the lady and his general character. Motive, place, opportunity, time, means, conduct, and his own record all were against him. Either he must cover up his tracks, don't you know, or else his career as a Lothario was at an end. A sweet dilemma. He realized, of course, that if he could get out and leave that side door bolted on the inside, he'd be comparatively safe. No one could then explain how he had come in or gone out. It would establish his own possible alibi, a negative one, to be sure, but, with a good lawyer, he could probably make it hold. Doubtless he searched for other means of escape, but found himself confronted with obstacles on every hand. The side door was his only hope. How could it be worked? Vance rose and yawned. That's my caressing theory. Skeel was caught in a trap, and with his shrewd, tricky brain he figured his way out. He may have roamed up and down these 2 rooms for hours before he hit on his plan, and it's not unlikely that he appealed to the deity with an occasion, oh my God. As for his using the tweezers, I'm inclined to think the mechanism of the idea came to him almost immediately. You know, Sergeant, this locking of a door on the inside is an old trick. There are any number of recorded cases of it in the criminal literature of Europe. Indeed, in Professor Hans Gross's book of criminology there's a whole chapter on the devices used by burglars for illegal entries and exits. But all such devices have to do with the locking, not the bolting of doors. The principle, of course, is the same, but the technique is different. To lock a door on the inside, a needle or strong slender pin is inserted through the bow of the key and pulled downward with string. But on the side door of this house there is no lock and key, nor is there a bow in the bolt handle. Now the resourceful Skeel, while pacing nervously about, looking for something that might offer a suggestion, probably espied the tweezers on the lady's dressing table. No lady nowadays is without these little eyebrow pluckers, don't you know?" And immediately his problem was solved. It remained only to test the device. Before departing, however, he chiseled open the jewel case which the other chap had merely dinted, and found the solitaire diamond ring that he later attempted to pawn. Then he erased, as he thought, all his fingerprints, forgetting to wipe off the inside doorknob of the closet, and overlooking the hand mark on the table. After that, he let himself out quietly, and rebolted the side door the same as he did, stuffing the tweezers in his waistcoat pocket and forgetting them. Heath nodded his head oracularly. "A crook, no matter how clever he is, always overlooks something." "Why single out crooks for your criticism, Sergeant?" asked Vance lazily. "Do you know of anybody in this imperfect world who doesn't always overlook something?" He gave Heath a benignant smile. "Even the police, don't you know, overlook the tweezers." Heath grunted. His cigar had gone out, and he relit it slowly and thoroughly. "What do you think, Mr. Markham?" "The situation doesn't become much clearer," was Markham's gloomy comment. "My theory isn't exactly a blinding illumination," said Vance. "Yet I wouldn't say that it left things in pristine darkness. There are certain inferences to be drawn from my vagaries. To wit, Skeel either knew or recognized the murderer, and once he had made good his escape from the apartment and had regained a modicum of self-confidence, he undoubtedly blackmailed his homicidal confrere. His death was merely another manifestation of our ingenuous bent for ridding himself of persons who annoyed him. Furthermore, my theory accounts for the chiseled jewel case, the fingerprints, the unmolested closet, the finding of the gems in the refuse tin. The person who took 'em really didn't want them, you know, and Skeel's silence. It also explains the unbolting and bolting of the side door." "Yes," sighed Markham. "It seems to clarify everything but the one all-important point, the identity of the murderer." "Exactly," said Vance. "Let's go to lunch." Heath, morose and confused, departed for police headquarters, and Markham, Vance, and I rode to Delmonico's, where we chose the main dining room in preference to the grill. "The case now would seem to center in Cleaver and Mannix," said Markham, when we had finished our luncheon. "If your theory that the same man killed both Skeel and the Canary is correct, then Lindquist is out of it, for he certainly was in the Episcopal Hospital Saturday night." "Quite," agreed Vance. "The doctor is unquestionably eliminated. Yes. Cleaver and Mannix, they're the alluring twins. Don't see any way to go beyond them." He frowned and sipped his coffee. "My original quartet is dwindling, and I don't like it. It narrows the thing down too much. There's no scope for the mind, as it were, and only two choices. What if we should succeed in eliminating Cleaver and Mannix? Where would we be, what? Nowhere, simply nowhere. And yet, one of the quartet is guilty. Let's cling to that consoling fact. It can't be Spotswood, and it can't be Lindquist. Cleaver and Mannix remain. 2 from 4 leaves 2. Simple arithmetic, what? The only trouble is, this case isn't simple. Lord, no, I say. How would the equation work out if we used algebra, or spherical trigonometry, or differential calculus? Let's cast it in the 4th dimension, or the 5th, or the 6th. He held his temples in both hands. "Oh, promise, Markham. Promise me that you'll hire a kind, gentle keeper for me. I know how you feel. I've been in the same mental state for a week." "It's the quartet idea that's driving me mad," moaned Vance. "It rings me to have my tetrad lopped off in such brutal fashion. I'd set my young trusting heart on that quartet, and now it's only a pair. My sense of order and proportion has been outraged. I want my quartet." "I'm afraid you'll have to be satisfied with 2 of them," Markham returned wearily. "One of them can't qualify, and one of them is in bed. You might send some flowers to the hospital, if it would cheer you any." "One is in bed, one is in bed," repeated Vance. Well, well, to be sure. And 1 from 4 leaves 3. More arithmetic. 3. On the other hand, there is no such thing as a straight line. All lines are curved. They transcribe circles in space. They look straight, but they're not. Appearances, so deceptive. Let's enter the silence, and substitute mentation for sight." He gazed up out of the great windows into Fifth Avenue. For several moments he sat smoking thoughtfully. When he spoke again, it was in an even, deliberate voice. "Markham, would it be difficult for you to invite Mannix and Cleaver and Spotswood to spend an evening? This evening, let us say, in your apartment?" Markham set down his cup with a clatter, and regarded Vance narrowly. "What new harlequinade is this? Fie on you! Answer my question." "Well, of course, I might arrange it," replied Markham hesitantly. "They're all more or less under my jurisdiction at present, so that such an invitation would be rather in line with the situation, what? And they wouldn't be likely to refuse you, old dear, would they?" "No, I hardly think so." "And if, when they had assembled in your quarters, you should propose a few hands of poker, they'd probably accept, without thinking the suggestion strange?" "Probably," said Markham, nonplussed at Vance's amazing request. "Cleaver and Spotswood both play, I know, and Mannix doubtless knows the game. But why poker? Are you serious? Or has your threatened dementia already overtaken you?" "Oh, I'm deuced serious." Vance's tone left no doubt as to the fact. "The game of poker, do you see, is the crux of the matter. I knew Cleaver was an old hand at the game, and Spotswood, of course, played with the Judge Redfern last Monday night, so that gave me a basis for my plan. Mannix will assume also plays." He leaned forward, speaking earnestly. "9/10 of poker, Markham, is psychology, and if one understands the game, one can learn more of a man's inner nature at a poker table in an hour than during a year's casual association with him. You rallied me once when I said I could lead you to the perpetrator of any crime by examining the factors of the crime itself. But naturally I must know the man to whom I am to lead you. Otherwise I cannot relate the psychological indications of the crime to the culprit's nature. In the present case, I know the kind of man who committed the crime, but I am not sufficiently acquainted with the suspects to point out the guilty one. However, after our game of poker, I hope to be able to tell you who planned and carried out the Canary's murder." Markham gazed at him in blank astonishment. He knew that Vance played poker with amazing skill, and that he possessed an uncanny knowledge of the psychological elements involved in the game. But he was unprepared for the latter's statement that he might be able to solve the Odell murder by means of it. Yet Vance had spoken with such undoubted earnestness that Markham was impressed. I knew what was passing in his mind almost as well as he had voiced his thoughts. He was recalling the way in which Vance had, in a former murder case, put his finger unerringly on the guilty man by a similar process of psychological deduction, and he was also telling himself that, however incomprehensible and seemingly extravagant Vance's requests were, there was always a fundamentally sound reason behind them. "Damn it," he muttered at last. "The whole scheme seems idiotic, and yet, if you really want a game of poker with these men, I've no special objection. It'll get you nowhere, I'll tell you that beforehand. It's stark nonsense to suppose that you can find the guilty man by such fantastic means." "Ah, well," sighed Vance, "a little futile recreation will do us no harm." "But why do you include Spotswood?" "Really, I haven't the slightest notion, except, of course, that he's one of my quartet, and will need an extra hand." "Well, don't tell me afterwards that I'm to lock him up for murder. I'd have to draw the line. Strange as it may seem to your layman's mind, I wouldn't care to prosecute a man, knowing that it was physically impossible for him to have committed the crime." "As to that," drawled Vance, "the only obstacles that stand in the way of physical impossibilities are material facts, and material facts are notoriously deceiving. Really, you lawyers would do better if you ignored them entirely." Markham did not deign to answer such hearsay, but the look he gave Vance was most expressive.